Some folks are born with a face the world praises, and some are born with a face the world misunderstands. Out on the frontier, where wind could peel paint from a church door and loneliness could hollow out a man before winter was through, beauty was not always where people first looked. Sometimes it lived in a hand that stayed steady when everyone else turned away. Sometimes it spoke in the voice of a child who had not yet learned the town's cruelty. Winifred Reed stepped down from the westbound train at the Livingston depot with her brown carpetbag in one gloved hand and a small blue hat pin shaped like a forget-me-not trembling in the other, because the wind had nearly torn her hat loose before both boots touched the boards. The platform smelled of coal smoke, wet wool, horse sweat, and spilled coffee from the lunch counter. Her left cheek, scarred pale from jaw to temple where old fire had drawn the skin tight, caught the gray Montana light before her eyes did. Someone laughed. It began as a cough behind a gentleman's hand, then slipped from the mouths of two young women in feathered hats, then widened into the cruel little rustle a crowd makes when it has found one person safe to wound. Winifred kept her chin straight, though her stomach folded in on itself. She had crossed half a country on a promise of marriage, with $12 sewn into her hem and a letter creased soft from being read under depot lamps. Near the freight scale stood a tall cowboy in a weather-dark coat, one hand resting on the shoulder of a little girl with tangled chestnut braids. His face was not handsome in any gentle way. It was lean, tired, and cut by sun, with a week's growth along the jaw and eyes that seemed to measure storms before they broke. That her, the depot porter whispered too loudly. Elias Turner did not answer. The little girl slipped from under his hand and came forward, boots knocking softly on the boards. She looked up at Winifred's scar, then at the hat pin still caught between Winifred's fingers. "She's beautiful," the child said. The laughing died so sharply that the station bell sounded loud enough to split the morning. Winifred looked down at the girl, 7 years old, perhaps 8, thin wrists, mended cuffs, eyes too watchful for a child. The child reached for the hat pin as if it were treasure. "It's a flower?" Winifred's throat tightened around the answer. "Oh, forget-me-not. I'm Annie," the girl said. "Pa said your name was Miss Reed." Winifred Reed. The tall cowboy finally moved. His boots struck the platform boards with slow reluctance, as if every step cost him something private. He took off his hat, not quite smoothly. "Elias Turner," he said. "I wrote the letter," a woman near the ticket window murmured. "Mercy, Elias. You didn't say she was burned." Winifred's hand closed around the hat pin until the metal bit her glove. Elias looked toward the woman. "No, Mrs. Bell. I said I was marrying a woman, not buying a china doll." A few faces turned away. The laughers found sudden interest in trunks and train steam. But Elias did not look proud of himself. His jaw worked once, like he had only said the least he could say, and wished none of it had needed saying. Winifred nodded, because nodding was safer than gratitude. "Mr. Turner." He looked at her carpetbag, then at the long train behind her. "Yes, that all?" "It is." Another pause. The depot clock ticked above the waiting room door. Annie stayed close, studying Winifred with open hunger. Not the hunger of food alone, though there was some of that in her sharp little face. The hunger of a child waiting to see whether a stranger might stay. "Before we go farther, tell me where you are watching from tonight. If this story touches your heart, please like it, share it with someone who loves quiet, frontier love, and subscribe so more stories like this can find their way home." Elias reached for the carpetbag. Winifred almost held on too long. "Yeah, I can carry it," she said. "I expect you can." He waited, not pulling. "Wagons out front." She let go. It was a small letting, but it felt like stepping from a bridge after the boards had already cracked behind her. The wagon stood beyond the depot yard, mud dried in ridges along its wheels, a folded quilt on the seat, and 2 sacks of flour under a canvas tarp. Elias put her carpetbag beside the flour, as if it mattered just as much. and helped Annie up first. Then he offered Winifred his hand. She hesitated. His hand was broad, knuckles scarred, palm darkened by rains and rope burns. It did not reach for her face. It did not flinch. So she placed her gloved fingers in it and climbed. The town of Livingston opened around them in a row of false front stores, hitching rails, and planked sidewalks silvered by last night's rain. Men paused outside the livery. Women watched from the mercantile windows. Winifred sat straight, skirt hem tucked away from the muddy footboard, her scar turned toward Elias because there was nowhere to hide it in a wagon built for weather instead of mercy. Annie settled between them, holding the forget-me-not hat pin in both hands, after Winifred had quietly fastened a loose hat with a plain one and given the blue flower into the child's keeping. I keep it till the ranch?" Annie asked. "Till the ranch," Winifred said. "Do you sew?" "Yes." "Can you make bread?" "Yes." "Can you braid hair without pulling?" Winifred looked at the tangled chestnut ropes falling from the girl's bonnet. "I can try." Annie's mouth made the beginning of a smile, then stopped, as if smiles were something she had learned to spend carefully. Elias clucked to the team. The wagon lurched forward. No one spoke again until town thinned to blacksmith smoke and empty lots, then to open road where the land rolled brown and green under a sky packed with low clouds. Snow still clung in the coulees, though it was April. Far off, mountains stood with white shoulders, solemn as judges. Winifred had imagined this ride many times during the 3 nights she slept sitting upright on the train. In those imagining hours she had pictured conversation, perhaps awkward kindness, perhaps a man relieved to see the woman who had answered his advertisement. Widower with young daughter seeks practical wife. Good home, hard work, respect offered. No false promises. She had answered because false promises had nearly killed her before. She had written plainly. She was 27. She could cook, keep accounts, tend a garden, mend clothing, read aloud and nurse fever. She had no family left. She did not write about the fire until the second letter, because she had learned that some truths, offered too early, became doors slammed before a person had finished knocking. His reply had been brief. "I need a wife who will not be frightened by a quiet house, a hard winter, or a child who misses her mother. I am not looking for beauty. Come if you mean to stay." She had come. Now, with town laughter still crawling under her collar, she wondered if he had understood what he wrote. Elias drove with his eyes on the road. "I'll say this plain," he said at last. "The house has 2 rooms downstairs and a loft. Annie sleeps in the small room. You'll take the loft until the wedding." Winifred turned to him. "Until the circuit preacher comes through in 2 weeks. We'll speak vows then, if you still want it. If you still want it. Not if he did. Not if the town approved." He had put the first gate in her hands. "And if I do not?" she asked. His jaw moved. "I'll pay your passage back east, or to Helena if you'd rather, higher on there." Annie's head snapped toward him. "Pa, that's enough, Annie." But she came. "I know she did." The child looked down at the hatpin, wounded by a door only partly open. Winifred folded her hands. "And until then, what am I?" "A guest," Elias said. The word sounded wrong in his mouth, too formal for a muddy road and a hungry child. "A guest does not usually scrub pots or mend shirts. Won't ask you to. I did not come to be kept under glass. Mr. Turner." He glanced at her then, and something like surprise passed through his eyes. "There isn't much glass at my place." That almost made Annie smile again. The Turner Ranch sat 12 miles out, where a creek bent through cottonwoods and the house leaned into the wind, as if it had been bracing itself for years. The barn roof sagged on one corner. A broken gate dragged in the mud. Hens scratched under an overturned crate. There was a stack of wood, but not enough. The front porch held 2 chairs, one with a split cane seat, and beside the door hung a woman's faded shawl, gray with dust. Winifred saw the shawl before she saw the empty windows. A dead woman still lived here. Not in ghostly fashion, not in superstition, but in the way no one had moved what hurt to touch. Elias saw her looking. His face closed. "Annie," he said, "take Miss Reed inside. I'll see to the team." The house smelled of cold ashes, boiled coffee, old leather, and something sour beneath the pump sink. Not filth exactly, neglect. The kind that settles when work is done only as far as survival demands. A skillet sat on the stove, with grease hardened white along its rim. A loaf of bread lay under a cloth, cut unevenly and stale at the edges. 2 tin cups, 3 plates, 1 cracked blue bowl. Annie watched Winifred see all of it. "I can sweep," the child said quickly. "I believe you. I can fry bacon too, only Pa says I stand too close." "That is because bacon spits at brave people." Annie blinked, then laughed once before she could stop herself. Winifred took off her gloves. The scar pulled slightly when the room's warmth touched it. Annie noticed, then looked away with fierce politeness. "Where is the broom?" By sunset, the skillet had been scoured with sand until the black iron shone dully. The sour cloths boiled, the table wiped, and coffee set fresh on the stove. Winifred did not ask permission for every motion, because a house that far gone needed mercy quicker than manners. She found flour, salt, lard, and a crock of milk turned near sour, but still fit for biscuits. Annie stood on a crate beside her, fingers dusty, eyes wide. "You press it soft," Winifred said. "Dough does not like a fist. Pa makes it flat as saddle leather. He has other talents, I expect." "What talents?" Winifred looked through the window. Outside, Elias was lifting a wagon wheel by himself while speaking low to a bay mare. "He can move things that would crush most men," Annie considered. "He does not sing." "No, Mama sang." The dough stilled under Winifred's hand. Annie looked frightened of what she had said, as if her mother's name might break something. Winifred only reached for the biscuit cutter, a tin cup with a bent rim. "What did she sing?" The girl shrugged one shoulder. "Old hymns. Sometimes silly songs. I don't remember all the words now." "That happens," Winifred said. "Words hide when grief is too loud." Annie looked at her then, truly looked, not at the scar but into her eyes. "Do they come back?" "Sometimes, when the house gets quiet enough." That night they ate at the rough pine table under a smoking lamp. Elias took one biscuit, broke it open, and paused. Annie watched him like a judge. He ate, then took another without speaking. That was the first compliment. Winifred slept in the loft, beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Through the floorboards, she heard Elias banking the stove, then the creak of his chair. She heard Annie murmur in the small room, once, long after darkness filled the rafters. She heard a man's breath catch and hold. Not crying, not quite. The next morning began before dawn with ice in the wash basin, and a rooster screaming like judgment outside the window. Winifred, dressed in the cold, pinned her hair at the nape and touched the left side of her face by habit. The ridges were familiar beneath her fingertips. She had once been pretty in the easy way that made strangers kind without thinking. Brown eyes, soft cheek, a face her mother had called gentle. The fire had taken the easy things and left the harder ones. Downstairs, Elias was already gone to the barn. Annie sat at the table trying to comb her own hair with a broken-tooth comb, tears of frustration shining but not falling. "My eye?" Winifred asked. Annie handed over the comb too quickly. Winifred warmed a little water, worked patiently from the ends, and separated the tangles with her fingers. The child sat stiff at first, waiting for pain. When none came, her shoulders lowered. "Mama used ribbons," Annie whispered. "What color?" "Yellow." Winifred looked around the room. No ribbon, no brightness at all, except the small blue hat pin on the windowsill, where Annie had placed it like an altar flower. "I have brown thread," Winifred said. "But when we go to town again, we will look for yellow. Pa won't buy foolishness." "Then I will," Annie turned. "With your money?" "With my money." The girls studied this new idea, that a woman might have money small enough to matter and large enough to choose a ribbon. When Elias came in, cold air followed him. He stopped at the sight of Annie's hair in 2 neat braids tied with strips of clean muslin. Annie touched one braid. "Miss Reed did it. I see. She didn't pull. I'm glad." He washed at the basin, his back broad under a faded shirt patched at both elbows. Winifred placed coffee near his hand before he reached for it. He looked at the cup, then at her. "Obliged," he said. By the 3rd day, the house began to resist its emptiness. Not much, a swept floor, a clean towel, beans soaking in a crock, the gray shawl taken from beside the door, beaten free of dust, folded, and laid in the trunk at the foot of Elias's bed, because Winifred would not throw away a woman's memory, but she would not let it hang like a sentence over every entrance. Elias noticed. His face went still. Annie froze by the stove. Winifred held the stove lid lifter in one hand and met his eyes. "It was gathering dust." He said nothing. "If you want it back on the peg, I will put it there," Annie whispered. "Pa?" Elias looked at the empty peg. For a moment, Winifred thought he would speak sharply. Instead, he took off his hat and hung it there. "No," he said. "The peg can hold something living after that." He avoided her for half a day. That was the way of Elias Turner. He did not punish with cruelty. He retreated into work, fence lines, barn hinges, roof trimming, anything with wood or iron that would not ask him what he felt. Winifred learned the wrench by touch, the pump handle that stuck unless lifted first, the pantry shelf that bowed under flour, the loose board near the stove, the hen that lay behind the woodpile, the Bible on the mantel with dried larkspur pressed inside, the account ledger tucked under a crock, figures written in Elias' heavy hand. She had not meant to look, but the ledger fell when she moved the crock to wipe beneath it, opening to a page marked with a black ribbon. "Feed bill overdue. Mortgage interest due my doctor from last winter. Coffin maker. Paid half." A ranch could look solid from the road and still be bleeding beneath the floor. She closed the ledger before Elias came in, but not before Annie saw her face. "Are we poor?" Annie asked later while gathering eggs. Winifred held a warm brown egg in her palm. "Many people are poor for a season. Are we losing the house?" "That is a question for your father. He won't answer." Then perhaps he is afraid of the answer. Annie scowled. "Pa isn't afraid." Winifred placed the egg in the basket. Brave people are afraid often. They just keep carrying the basket. That evening, Elias found the ledger on the table instead of under the crock. Beside it lay 3 neat columns in Winifred's handwriting. Household needs, ranch debts, possible savings. She had not touched his figures, only ordered them. His eyes darkened. "You went through my private papers?" "No, they fell. Then I saw enough to know they should not be under a crock. My debts are not your concern. They will be if I marry you." The room quieted. Annie stood by the stove holding a spoon too tightly. Elias shut the ledger. "We are not married." "No," Winifred said. "We are not." The words struck harder than she meant them to. Elias flinched, not outwardly, but somewhere behind the eyes. He took the ledger and walked out into the dark. Annie stared after him. "He gets like that. I know. He doesn't mean to be mean. I know that too. Are you leaving?" Winifred looked at the child's face, pale in lamplight, already prepared for abandonment, like a body prepared for cold. She wanted to promise, but promises had weight, and children were crushed by broken ones. "Not tonight," she said. Annie accepted it as if it were bread. The circuit preacher did not come in 2 weeks. A late snow blocked the pass, then rain turned the road into sucking mud. The wedding waited. So did everyone's opinion. In town, opinion sharpened. Mrs. Bell from the depot told the Mercantile that Elias Turner had sent for a bride, without seeing her face, and now did not know how to be rid of her. Mr. Hasker, who ran the dry goods counter and extended credit only when he could smell profit, told two ranch hands that a scarred woman from back east might be hiding worse than her looks. The church women wondered aloud whether Annie ought to be raised by someone so marked by misfortune. Winifred heard none of this at first. She heard only wind, pump water, the scrape of Elias's chair, Annie's breathing as she fell asleep, while Winifred read from an old primer by the stove. Then one Thursday, Elias hitched the wagon for town. "Need seed, nails, lamp oil," he said. "You can come if you've a mind." Annie appeared in the doorway with both braids tied in clean muslin. "Can we get yellow ribbon?" Elias looked trapped. Winifred took pity on him. "We can look. Towns smell different after rain. Wet boards, manure, yeast from the bakery, tobacco smoke drifting from the saloon doors, though it was barely noon." Winifred walked between Elias and Annie, aware of heads turning, aware of the way conversations thinned as she passed. At Hasker's Mercantile, she selected lamp wicks, salt, coffee, and a packet of carrot seed. Elias spoke with Hasker about nails. Annie stood before a small tray of ribbons, as if before a stained glass window. "Yellow," she breathed. The ribbon was only a narrow length of satin, not fine, not expensive by Eastern standards. 8 cents. But Elias saw the price and looked toward the flour sacks, counting silently. Winifred opened her reticule. Hasker leaned over the counter, eyes on her scar. Best not waste money prettying what can't be helped. The store went still. Annie's hand closed around Winifred's skirt. Elias turned from the nail keg. Winifred felt the old heat rise in her cheek, not from fire, but from being made spectacle. She had endured worse. She knew the safest answer was none. But Annie was watching. Winifred laid her coins on the counter one by one. "The ribbon is for the child," Hasker smirked. "The child could use a mother with a whole face." The sound that came from Elias was not loud. It was worse than loud. "Hasker." The storekeeper's smile faded. Elias stepped to the counter. "You will wrap the ribbon." "I meant no harm. You meant it careful." Hasker looked around for support and found only customers studying barrels and shelves. Men who enjoyed cruelty often disliked standing beside it once named. Elias put the nails back into the keg. "We'll buy elsewhere." "There is no elsewhere for nails within 30 miles. Then I'll pull old ones from my own boards before I pay you to insult my household." "My household." The words moved through Winifred slowly. Hasker's face reddened. "You owe on last winter's account. I know what I owe. And come the bank will know too." Elias went very still. Winifred saw it, and Hasker was not only cruel, he was informed. Annie's lower lip trembled, but she lifted her chin toward the counter. "Miss Reed is beautiful," she said again, smaller than at the depot but braver, because this time she knew what it cost. Winifred reached down and took the child's hand. Elias placed a dime on the counter. "The ribbon." Hasker hesitated. Elias did not move. The ribbon was wrapped. They rode home with no nails, less flour than planned, and yellow satin tied around Annie's braids. The girl touched it every few minutes, smiling out at the road. Elias drove like a man with a storm under his ribs. At the ranch, he unloaded in silence. Winifred carried the coffee inside. When she came back for the seed packet, Elias was standing beside the wagon, hat in hand, looking toward the mountains. "You should not have had to hear that," he said. "No," his eyes flicked to her. He seemed unprepared for agreement. "No," she repeated softly. "I should not have." His shoulders lowered, not from relief, but from the weight of truth allowed to stand between them. "I was slow," he said. "You came." After he spoke twice. "You came before the third." A weary breath left him, almost a laugh, but not one. "Yes, the mercy, Miss Reed. It is arithmetic." He looked at her then, for a long moment. The kind of look that did not try to turn away from the scar, nor force itself to stare past it, the kind that began to include all of her. That night, he brought the ledger to the table. Annie was asleep. The lamp burned low. Rain ticked softly against the window. EIIO Hasker $23. Elias said. The bank 80 in interest. Lost 6 head in the January freeze. Sold 3 more to pay the doctor. I can make it if the spring calves hold, and if I get hired for the cattle drive in June. And Annie. She stays with Mrs. Bell when I drive. Winifred remembered the depot laughter. Does she? His hand tightened on the ledger. No, the word fell like a stone. Winifred drew the ledger closer. There are other ways to make money before June, such as, you have hens laying more than you use. I can sell eggs. I can bake bread for the railroad boarding house if the oven holds heat. I saw currants near the creek. Lighter jam. I can mend for ranch hands. Your shirts alone suggest a market. He looked down at his elbow patch. And your accounts, she added, need order. Men lose money in the cracks when they are too tired to count it. Elias studied the neat columns in her hand. Why would you do that? She dipped the pen. Because I am not decorative, Mr. Turner. His mouth tightened with something like shame. No, he said quietly. You are not. It should not have warmed her. It did. The days lengthened. Snow shrank into the shaded places. Mud dried in the wagon ruts. Winifred planted carrots, onions, and beans in a patch Elias had given up after his wife died. The soil was stubborn, full of stones, and she worked them loose with a hand fork until her palms blistered. Elias saw the blisters at supper and set a small tin of salve beside her plate without speaking. She used it after he looked away. Annie learned to knead dough, gather eggs without frightening the hens, and read whole sentences from the primer. She still woke some nights calling for her mother. At first Elias went in alone and came out looking older. Then one night, Annie called for Winifred instead. The house held its breath. Elias stood at the foot of the stairs in his stocking feet. Winifred came down from the loft with her braid over one shoulder. She asked for you, he said, as if both grateful and wounded. Winifred paused beside him. I heard she gets fever sometimes when she dreams. I know what fear feels like in sleep. Their eyes met in the dark. Annie called again. Winifred went in. The little room held a narrow bed, a crate for a table, one rag doll with button eyes, and the new yellow ribbon folded carefully under the pillow. Annie's cheeks were hot. She clutched at Winifred's sleeve. Don't go on the train, the child whispered. I am here. Everyone goes. Winifred sat on the edge of the bed and laid a cool cloth on Annie's forehead. Not everyone. Mama did. No, sweetheart. Your mama did not leave you on purpose. Annie cried then, silently, with tears running into her hair. Winifred gathered her close and rocked without song, because she did not know the mother's songs, and would not steal them. She hummed only a low note steady as breathing. In the doorway, Elias stood unseen by Annie, but not by Winifred. His face was bare in the lamplight, bare and broken and afraid of wanting what he saw. Later, when Annie slept, Winifred stepped into the main room. Elias had not gone back to bed. He stood by the coal stove. My wife's name was Clara, he said. Winifred waited. She took fever after nursing half the valley through influenza. Wouldn't stop, wouldn't rest. I got angry at her for it. His voice roughened. Last thing I said before she couldn't hear me proper was that she cared more for strangers than her own child. Winifred's heart hurt with the particular cruelty of words that outlived the moment that made them. She knew you were afraid, she said. You can't know that? No, but I know people say sharp things when love has nowhere to put its terror. He looked at her, and the room was quiet enough for the stove ashes to settle. What did the fire take from you? He asked. Her hand rose before she could stop it, fingers hovering near the scar. Elias looked away at once. Forgive me. No, she lowered her hand. You might ask. Just not in daylight with a store watching. He swallowed. My father kept a print shop in Ohio, she said. We lived above it. A kerosene lamp fell during a storm. My mother died before the stairs. My father went back for the account books and did not come out. I was found by a neighbor under a wet quilt near the back door. Elias's face tightened. I was engaged then, she said. The words cost more than she expected. Elias said nothing. His name was Samuel Pike. He came to see me after. Once, he brought flowers and looked at the wall above my head while he spoke. 2 weeks later, his mother wrote that the match was unsuitable. She said I would understand. The lamp flame trembled. Did you? Elias asked. Winifred smiled a little, not kindly. Oh, I understood everything. He looked at her scar then, not as men in town did, but as if seeing a battlefield after the wounded had already been carried away. On the mantel sat the old Bible, dried larkspur between its pages. Elias took it down and opened it, not to read, only to touch the pressed flowers. Clara put those there, he said. I haven't opened it since. Why now? He looked at the flowers. House is getting quiet enough. It was the most he had said, and less than he meant. The preacher came in By then the garden had green lines pushing through. The barn door hung straighter. Elias had repaired the broken gate with old nails pulled from the shed, just as he had promised. Winifred's bread had sold twice at the boarding house after the cook there, a red-faced woman named Mrs. Larkin, declared that scar or no scar, the woman knew yeast better than most knew prayer. Eggs brought small coins, mending brought more. Still, the bank date came like weather. The preacher arrived on a Sunday afternoon in a mud-spattered buggy, thin as a fence rail and smelling of peppermint. The wedding could have been done in the Turner parlor with Annie holding flowers from the creek bank. Quiet, legal, safe. Instead, Mrs. Bell insisted that vows are to be said in church before witnesses, for the child's sake and to avoid talk. Talk had already saddled its horse and ridden everywhere. Elias did not want church. Winifred saw that at once. We can refuse, he said while currying the bay mare. Yes, you want to? She watched dust rise from the horse's coat in soft brown clouds. No, his hand stilled. I have hidden enough in my life, she said. I will not enter marriage like something shameful carried through a back door. Elias looked down. I never meant. I know what you meant. I am telling you what I mean. So they stood before the church on Tuesday morning. Winifred wore her dark blue dress, brushed and mended, with clean cuffs and her hair pinned beneath a plain bonnet. Annie had picked 3 early wildflowers and tied them with yellow ribbon. Elias wore a black coat that had been his wedding coat once before, altered badly at the shoulder. His face looked carved. People came who had no reason to come except curiosity. Mrs. Bell sat front left, lips pursed. Hasker stood near the back with banker Lowell, both men smelling faintly of tobacco and satisfaction. 2 young women who had laughed at the depot whispered behind their gloves. Winifred walked down the short aisle alone, because she had no father, no brother, no man from her past, willing to place her hand into another's. Her boots sounded plainly on the boards. Halfway forward, Annie broke from the front pew and ran to her. A murmur moved through the church. Annie took Winifred's hand. I walk with you. Winifred looked at Elias. Something in his face shifted, pain and gratitude crossing so quickly that only she might have seen. The vows were not romantic. They were heavy. To have and to hold sounded less like poetry and more like a gate closing against wolves. Winifred said each word clearly. Elias' voice roughened on cherish, nearly failed on death do us part. But he did not look away. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, no one clapped. This was not a clapping sort of congregation. Elias did not kiss her. They had agreed without saying so that some tenderness would need time to become honest. He only turned, offered his arm, and walked beside her into the hard white light outside. Mrs. Bell was first to speak. Well, she said, looking at Winifred's face, at least the child has someone to cook. Elias stopped. Winifred's fingers tightened on his sleeve. But before he could answer, Annie stepped in front of Mrs. Bell, small, chin lifted. She reads to me. She plants carrots. She fixed Pa's shirts and sold bread and made the house smell good. She isn't just someone to cook. Mrs. Bell flushed. I did not mean. Yes, you did, Annie said. Winifred touched her shoulder. Annie, the child trembled, but did not cry. Elias looked at his daughter, then at the watching town. My daughter has the right of it. He placed his hat on his head. Mrs. Turner is my wife. Anyone unable to speak of her with respect can speak elsewhere. Mrs. Turner. It was strange how a name could feel too large at first, like a coat not yet shaped to the body. They returned to the ranch with no celebration, except biscuits, beans, coffee, and the 3 wildflowers placed in a jar at the center of the table. That evening, Elias carried Winifred's carpet bag down from the loft and set it by the bedroom door, then stopped as if the bag had become a wild animal. I can sleep in the barn, he said. You will not. His eyes lifted. This is your house, she said, and now by law mine. We can be decent without being foolish. Color touched his cheekbones beneath the weathering. There's a cot in the small storage room, he said. I'll move my things there. Elias. It was the first time she had used his given name without formality. He still. We will not build a marriage on your exile. She folded her hands to steady them. The room is large enough for boundaries. So they arranged the bedroom with a line as clear as a river. His side, her side, a chair between. The old trunk at the foot, Clara's folded shawl still inside it. Winifred placed her brush, Bible, and small sewing roll on the dresser. Elias watched as if each object asked permission from the dead. That first night, they lay apart in the dark, both awake. After a long while, Elias said, "This is awkward." Winifred stared up at the ceiling. "Yes, I don't know how to be married and not what? Not belong where I used to belong." The words entered the darkness softly. Winifred turned her head toward him, though she could only see the outline of his shoulder. "Then do not try tonight," he breathed out. "What should I do? Sleep?" A pause. Then, so dryly she almost missed it, he said, "I remember being better at that." She smiled in the dark. Marriage changed less than Annie hoped and more than Elias expected. Winifred still rose first some mornings, Elias others. They passed each other at the stove in gray dawn, reaching for a coffee, kindling, the tin of sugar. At first their hands jerked back when they touched. Later they simply made room. Annie began calling her Winnie by accident one afternoon while chasing a hen out of the garden, then froze in horror. Winifred looked up from the bean roll. "I is the hen," impressed by formal names. Annie grinned. "Winnie then." Elias, repairing harness by the porch, bent his head over the leather and said nothing. But that night, Winifred found a new pair of work gloves on the kitchen's shelf, smaller than his, paid for with money that should have gone to tobacco or boot polish. She set them beside her plate at breakfast. "Thank you." Elias poured coffee. "Garden hands need leather," that was all. But his ears reddened. The fragile piece lasted until Banker Lowell came in a buggy bright enough to announce step before the man stepped down. He arrived on a clear afternoon when Winifred had bread cooling near the window, and Annie was drawing letters in flour, dust on the table. Elias was at the north pasture. The banker removed his gloves finger by finger, looking around the Turner kitchen with a smile that measured value and weakness together. "Mrs. Turner," he said, "how domestic." Winifred wiped her hands on her apron. "Mr. Lowell, I hope to find your husband. He is working. Men often are when payments come due." Annie looked up from the table. Winifred stepped slightly between them. "You might leave the notice." Lowell drew a folded paper from his coat. "Interest unpaid as of the 1st. There are procedures, of course, but Mr. Hasker has expressed interest in purchasing the note. He has means to be patient or impatient, depending on the conduct of the borrower." There it was, not business, Punishment. How much is due now? Winifred asked. $80 interest plus fees. I know the interest. What fees? Lowell's smile thinned. Filing, carriage, administrative. Show them. His eyes cooled. Your husband can inquire. I am his wife. Show them. Annie stopped breathing loudly. Lowell looked at Winifred's scar, then at her apron, then at the bread on the table as if he had placed her in the category where women could be dismissed safely. Perhaps you should concern yourself with dough, Mrs. Turner. Winifred removed her apron, folded it once, and laid it over the chair. Before I came west, I kept accounts for my father's print shop. After he took ill, I collected debts from men who cursed ink stains as if they were mortal wounds. If you intend to add fees not written in the original note, you will show the clause allowing it. Lowell's face changed. Not much. Enough. He placed the paper on the table. Winifred read it while Annie watched, eyes wide with the dawning realization that flower hands could still fight. The fees were false, dressed in fine wording but false. You might tell Mr. Hasker, Winifred said. That hunger makes people careless, but not always stupid. Lowell snatched the paper back. You are making enemies. No, she said. I am counting them. When Elias came home, he found her sitting with the ledger, the bread untouched, Annie silent beside her. He read the notice. The old Elias would have withdrawn. She saw the impulse move through him. Take the debt into himself. Shut the door, spare everyone by telling them nothing. But his eyes went to Annie, then to Winifred's ink-stained fingers. What do we do? He asked. Winifred's throat tightened. We pay the true interest, she said, not the false fees. And we do it before Hasker buys the note. How? She showed him the columns. Bread, eggs, mending, a calf sold early, though it would hurt. Elias's June cattle drive wages advanced, perhaps, if Mr. Dalrymple could be persuaded. Elias stared at the figures. You've been doing this every night? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? You were not ready to be helped without feeling accused. His mouth opened, then closed. Annie, still at the table, whispered, She got banker Lowell mad. Elias looked at Winifred. Did she? He was already mad. I only focused him for the first time since she met him. Elias laughed fully. It startled the room. It startled him most of all. Annie laughed because he did. Winifred looked down at the ledger, smiling despite herself. That laugh became something the house remembered, but debt did not vanish because a family laughed at supper. Elias rode to Dalrymple's spread 2 days later and returned after dark with dust in his hair and bad news in his shoulders. No advance, too many men asking, not enough cattle sold. He would have to leave for the drive in June and hope wages came before foreclosure. June meant weeks gone. June meant Annie left behind. June meant Winifred facing town pressure with a child and a note Hasker wanted badly enough to poison. She did not argue that night. Elias was too tired to hear reason as anything but blame. She only placed stew before him and watched him eat every bite. At midnight, she woke to the sound of the front door closing. Elias stood on the porch in his shirt sleeves, looking toward the barn. The moon made the yard silver. The repaired gate cast a long shadow like a crossbar. Winifred wrapped a shawl around herself and stepped outside. You'll freeze. Not yet. He did not look at her. I should send you both away. The words struck cold. Both? You and Annie. To Helena, my bay. Clara's sister might take the girl. You could find work where folks don't. He stopped. Don't laugh. His hands closed on the porch rail. Say it, she said. He shook his head. Winifred felt something inside her draw up tall and wounded. Do you want me gone? Elias. No. It came too quickly to be pride. Then do not dress fear as sacrifice. He turned. I have nothing solid to offer you. This house might be gone by summer. My name is Mud at the Bank. Town treats you like they treated me before you ever wrote a letter. His face tightened. I was not rescued from cruelty when I married you, she said. I was invited to stand somewhere new while facing it. That is not enough. No, it is not. Her voice softened, but it is something. The night wind moved between them. Elias looked at her as if every careful boundary in the room behind them had become both blessing and torment. I am afraid, he said. There it was, the line that said less than it meant. Winifred stepped closer, leaving only a hand's breadth between them. SOMI. He looked down at her hand resting on the shawl. Slowly, giving her time to refuse, he covered it with his own. She did not pull away. The next morning Hasker came. He arrived not with Banker Lowell, but with a man Winifred recognized before he spoke. Samuel Pike stepped down from the buggy wearing a fine gray suit, unsuited to ranch mud. His hair parted cleanly, his gloves pale. For a moment the yard disappeared and she was back in an Ohio sick room, bandaged, thirsty, listening to a man speak to the wall above her head. Elias was in the barn. Annie was feeding hens. Samuel removed his hat. Winifred, her old name in his mouth, felt like a hand reaching through ashes. Mr. Pike, Hasker smiled from beside the buggy. Seems you have visitors from your former life. Mrs. Turner. Samuel's eyes flicked to the scar and away. Still away, after all these years. I came west on business, he said. Mr. Hasker mentioned you were here. I thought perhaps. He looked around the ranch, at the sagging barn, the muddy yard, Annie in her patched dress. Perhaps you required assistance. Winifred stood on the porch step. What sort? A respectable position has opened in Helena. Housekeeper for a widowed aunt of mine. Quiet home, proper wages. It would be better than... Again he looked around. Than my husband's ranch? Hasker laughed softly. Can't blame a man for seeing facts. Annie came closer, feed pail against her chest. Samuel lowered his voice. Winifred, you needn't bind yourself to a failing man out of desperation. Whatever vows were spoken can be handled. Frontier arrangements are often irregular. Her wedding ring, plain and thin, felt suddenly heavy. Elias emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He saw the buggy, Hasker, Samuel. Then he saw Winifred's face. He crossed the yard. Something needed? He asked. Samuel offered a polished smile. Samuel Pike, an old friend of your wife's. Elias did not take the offered hand. Old? The word was not jealous. It was protective of the wound he could feel without knowing its shape. Samuel's smile tightened. I knew Miss Reed before her accident. Winifred saw Elias absorb accident and understand it for what it was. A small word meant to shrink a life. Hasker stepped forward. Pike here has offered to settle a portion of your debt if Mrs. Turner takes employment with his family. Generous, considering. Elias looked at Winifred. Not at Hasker, not at Samuel, at her. The yard waited. Here was the bargain that could save him. Send the scarred bride away respectably. Place Annie with relatives. Keep the ranch perhaps. Return to an emptiness he understood. Winifred's heart beat hard enough to blur the cottonwoods. Samuel spoke gently, which was worse. You were not made for this roughness. Before Winifred could answer, Annie cried, She is. Everyone looked at the child. Annie's face flushed, but she stood firm. She can carry water and fix accounts and make bread and talk to bankers. She helped the red calf breathe when it came wrong. She is made for here. Samuel looked embarrassed for her. Child, you don't understand. Elias took one step forward. She understands better than most. Hasker's voice sharpened. Think carefully. Turner, pride is costly. Elias looked at the man. So is shame. I've paid enough of it. Then he did something Winifred did not expect. He walked to the porch, stood beside her, and took her hand in full view of the yard, the road, the buggy, his enemy, and the man who had once abandoned her. His palm was warm. Work rough. Certain. My wife is not for trade, he said. Samuel's face colored. I meant no insult. Winifred looked at him then. Yes, Samuel, you did, only gently. You always did cruelty gently. Hasker spat into the dirt. Then lose the ranch. Elias' hand tightened around hers. Winifred lifted her chin. Not today. The buggy left in a wheel spray of mud, but after it vanished, Elias released her hand too quickly, as if suddenly ashamed of having wanted to keep holding it. Winifred went inside and packed. Not much. The carpet bag did not require much. Brush, Bible, sewing roll. The blue dress folded tight. She heard Elias enter behind her and stop. You are leaving, he said. I am going to Livingston. Why? To speak with banker Lowell before Hasker does. Winifred? She closed the bag. Do not use my name like a locked door. His eyes darkened with worry. It isn't safe to go alone. Then hitch the wagon. He stared at her. You want me with you? I wanted you with me before Samuel came. I wanted you with me when Hasker insulted me. I wanted you with me when the bank notice came. I do not need you to send me away or stand in front of me like I am breakable. Her voice shook despite her efforts. I need you beside me. Elias looked as if she had struck him and healed him in the same motion. The simple sentence came rough. Then I'm beside you. They rode to town with Annie between them, wearing her yellow ribbons like flags. At the bank, Lowell tried to refuse them. Winifred placed her ledger on his desk. Elias placed a pouch of coins beside it. Bread money, egg money, mending money, $2 from selling a saddle Elias had owned since boyhood, and a small roll of bills from Winifred's emergency ham savings. The banker counted twice. Still short, he said. By $12, Winifred said. Lowell leaned back. Then the note remains vulnerable. Elias took something from inside his coat and laid it on the desk. A gold watch. It was old, scratched, but fine beneath wear. Clara's father's watch. Winifred knew without being told. Elias had once shown it to Annie on a winter evening, letting her hold it only over a quilt, in case she dropped it. Annie made a small sound. Elias did not look at her. That will cover 12. Lowell picked up the watch. Sentimental pieces rarely bring. It is gold, Winifred said. Weigh it. Lowell looked irritated because she was right. Elias stared at the watch in the banker's hand, and Winifred saw what it cost. Not the gold. The permission to let the dead stop governing the living. Annie's eyes filled, but she did not protest. She only slipped her hand into Winifred's. Lowell wrote the receipt. Outside, the town had gathered in pieces. Hasker stood across the street. Mrs. Bell near the bakery. Samuel Pike by the hotel steps with a valise beside him. Elias held the receipt. Hasker called out, "Watch yourself another month, Turner." Elias folded the paper carefully and placed it inside his coat. Bought what was owed. Want make her pretty. The sentence hit the street like a thrown stone. Winifred felt Annie's hand jerk. Something changed in Elias then. Not rage, though rage was there. Not pride, though pride stood straight. It was decision. He stepped down from the bank porch into the street. Wagon wheels quieted. Men turned from hitching rails. The whole town seemed to lean in. When my wife came here, Elias said, voice carrying. Some of you laughed, because fire left a mark on her face. You did not ask what she survived. You did not ask what work her hands knew. You did not ask whether her courage might shame your manners. Winifred stood frozen on the porch. Elias removed his hat. I let too much pass because I have lived these past years half buried with my grief, and a buried man does not defend the living quick enough. That ends now. Hasker's mouth twisted. Pretty speech? No, Elias said. Plain notice. Any man who insults Mrs. Turner insults me. Any woman who teaches my daughter to mock another soul's suffering will not be welcome near my house. And if beauty is what concerns this town, then you have been looking with poor eyes. Annie stepped forward, trembling. She's beautiful. This time, her voice rang across the boards, across the mud, Across the bank windows and mercantile barrels and hotel porch where Samuel Pike looked down at his polished shoes, Elias turned back toward Winifred. "She is," he said. There was no laughter. Mrs. Larkin from the boarding house broke the silence first. She came out holding a flour sack against one hip. "I'll say this, her bread rises better than half the women whispering." She glared toward Mrs. Bell. "And courage sits finer on a face than powder." A ranch hand near the livery muttered, "That's true enough." Someone else coughed. Someone shuffled. Shame moved through the street, slow but visible. Mrs. Bell's lips trembled with the effort of pride losing battle to conscience. She crossed from the bakery and stopped before Winifred. "He spoke poorly," she said, stiff as a fence post. "At the depot. After. At church, too." Winifred did not rescue her from discomfort. Mrs. Bell swallowed. "I am sorry, Mrs. Turner." Winifred looked at the woman for a long moment. "Then speak better next time." Mrs. Bell nodded. It was not forgiveness exactly. It was a gate left unlatched. On the ride home, Annie fell asleep against Winifred's side, exhausted by bravery. Elias drove with one hand on the reins, the other resting open on his knee. After several miles, Winifred placed her hand in it. He did not startle this time. The ranch looked different when they returned, though nothing had changed but the people entering it. The gate still needed paint. The barn roof still sagged. The garden still required weeding. Debt still crouched in the future, waiting. But the house no longer seemed to be apologizing for standing. That evening, Elias went to the trunk and took out Clara's saw. Winifred, kneading dough stilled. He held the gray cloth carefully. Annie watched from the table. "Your mother wore this when she sang?" Elias said to his daughter. Annie touched the fringe. "I remember. I thought keeping it on the peg kept her near." His voice grew rough. "Maybe it only kept us from moving." He looked at Winifred. "Would you put it somewhere proper?" She washed her hands, dried them, and took the shawl as one receives something sacred but not fragile. She folded it over the back of the rocking chair by the stove. "Near enough for memory," she said. "Not in the doorway." Elias nodded. Later, after Annie slept, Winifred stepped onto the porch. The sunset spread gold over the creek and caught on the repaired gate. Behind her, dishes dried on a clean towel. Bread cooled under cloth. A jar of wildflowers sat on the table, joined now by the first thin carrot tops Annie had proudly pulled too early. Elias came out with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and leaned against the porch post, leaving space but not distance. "I sold the watch," he said. "I know. Thought it would feel like betrayal. Does it?" He looked through the window where Annie slept beyond the lamplit room. "No, feels like buying breath." Winifred held the warm cup between her palms. "I was afraid you would go with him," Elias said. "Samuel." He nodded. "He offered ease," she said. "Not home." Elias looked at her then. The last light showed every line in his face, every hard year, every mistake not yet forgiven, but no longer hidden. "And this is home?" he asked. Winifred looked at the porch boards swept clean, the yellow ribbon Annie had left tied to a nail by the door, the garden dark beyond the yard, the smoke rising from the chimney, and the man beside her who had finally learned that protection was not the same as distance. "It is becoming one," she said. His hand moved slow enough for choice. She met it halfway. No one spoke for a while. The frontier did not soften itself for them. Winter would come again. Money would matter. Boards would split. Cattle would sicken. Towns could forget their shame and need reminding. Love would still require chores, patience, apology, and bread baked before dawn. But inside the Turner house, a child slept without clutching her ribbon beneath her pillow. A dead woman's shawl rested in warmth instead of dust. A scarred bride's blue hatpin stood in a small cup on the windowsill, catching the last of the sun like a tiny flower that had crossed a continent and survived the laughter. And Elias Turner, who had once thought his heart was only a locked room full of old grief, kept coffee warm beside Winifred Reed until the stars came out over Montana and the house behind them glowed like something chosen.